qualify with Security Shield to provide 24/7 cyber protection and get a free mobile line to stay connected all the time. Get Spectrum One for Business. One advanced solution with all the connectivity your small business needs for the lowest price. Only $49.99 per month. Call 855-581-6858 today. Spectrum Business. Made to work.
You are loved. You are valued. You are resilient. You got this.
You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides at aarp.org/caregiving.
Good evening, I'm Errol Lewis, national political anchor for Spectrum News, and you are watching our special coverage of the Republican National Convention. It is 8 o'clock on the East Coast, 5 o'clock on the West Coast, and 7 p.m. in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That's where the convention is being held. It has been a big day for former President Donald Trump, who is now the official nominee of the Republican Party for the third time. Joining him on the ticket, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, who at one time was a never-Trumper. That, of course, is not the case now. And there was a big legal victory for the Republican nominee today. Judge Aileen Cannon Trump this morning. A lot going on here. And tonight's theme on day one of the Republican National Convention is Make America Wealthy Once Again. Republicans will try to make the case that America will be better off under former President Donald Trump's economic policies. Some of the speakers who have already addressed the convention delegates tonight or will be addressing them include Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Senator Katie Britt, Senator Tim Scott, Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia, Governor Kristi Noem, Representative Byron Donalds, and Senator Marsha Blackburn. A lot of Republican stars, but the headliner tonight will be Sean O'Brien, president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. That's a direct aim at President Joe Biden, who calls himself the most pro-union president in American history. The Teamsters 4 years ago endorsed Joe Biden. Unclear what they are going to do this time around. So we've got a lot to talk about tonight. Let me bring in political reporter Taylor Popolars. And Taylor, you used to cover the state of Ohio, so you know Senator J.D. Vance. Tell us a little bit about him.
So people might know J.D. Vance best for the book that he wrote before he entered politics. It's called Hillbilly Elegy. It was a memoir of his time growing up in Middletown, Ohio, which is in the Cincinnati region in southwest Ohio. He had a mother who was an addict. They were pretty poor growing up, and he was largely raised by his grandmother, who he called Mama. And Hillbilly Elegy kind of exploded onto the scene in 2015 and 16 because the political media class and the political class at large felt that Vance was able to speak about the white working class and explain why so many white working class voters were drawn to Donald Trump. So he became a talking head. He was a CNN contributor at one point. He also has a pretty impressive background in terms of his kind of rise from rags to riches. He went into the Marines and he served in the Middle East. He then went to Ohio. He became a venture capitalist. He made a good amount of money there. He's a lawyer, so he has a pretty strong resume. And then in 2021, he decided to run for U.S. Senate in Ohio. And during the years before that, when he was a talking head and an author, he was a pretty big critic of Trump, as you alluded to, a self-described never-Trumper. But once he went back to Ohio and he wanted to run for office, he did a complete 180, and he became one of Donald Trump's most vocal advocates and supporters that helped him get Trump's endorsement in a Republican primary that was very crowded in Ohio that I covered every step of the way. Then he beat Democrat Tim Ryan in Ohio to win a 6-year Senate term. He's only been in office since January of 2023, but he's really made a name for himself as the chief defender in the U.S. Senate of Trump, and it seems that he's been able to make amends with Trump, also helping him as a friendship with Donald Trump Jr.
Okay, so now, Taylor, as if there weren't enough already going on, President Biden gave an interview not long ago, actually within the hours, on Trump's selection of J.D. Vance. Let's listen to that.
He's a clone of Trump on the issues. a clone of Trump on the issue. So I don't see any difference.
Doesn't see any difference. What is the campaign saying about this selection?
So, there's no surprise that the Biden campaign and Democrats at large were going to be critical of any pick that Donald Trump made. But the Biden campaign specifically is saying about Vance that, one, he supports Trump's baseless claim that the 2020 election was stolen. The Biden campaign is saying if Donald Trump and J.D. Vance win in November, then Vance is will be vice president, and there won't be a guarantee that he'll certify election results if he disagrees with them. The Biden campaign is also talking a lot about Project 2025 and how Vance has been a promoter of some of the ideas in that. It's this conservative platform put together by the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, that the Trump case, but Vance has spoken at some events with some of the people behind it, writing-wise. He's spoken complimentary of portions of that agenda, and the Biden campaign is also talking about something like abortion. Vance is a devout Catholic. He became Catholic several years ago. He's very against abortion, but he's also talked about how after voters in his home state of Ohio voted to protect abortion rights, that the Republican Party needs to figure out how to speak about the topic differently without necessarily changing their opinion on it. But Democrats in the Biden campaign are saying if Vance gets elected with Trump, they will push forward with a national abortion ban, even though they're not necessarily saying that right now. So a lot of incoming information from the Democrats. They're also pointing to Vance's never Trump comments from years ago, but honestly, those have been on the airwaves for years because JD has been this celebrity figure well before he was in political office.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Taylor. Live in Milwaukee, we've got Spectrum News anchor and chief national political reporter Josh Robin. We've also got joining us and joining our coverage tonight as well, Spectrum News political anchors Holly Gregory, Tim Boyum, and Alex Cohen. So let me start with you, Holly. What does J.D. Vance bring to the ticket? What's the thinking, do you think, behind Donald Trump's selection?
The thinking behind it is that this shows that Donald Trump is a very, very confident candidate right now. Vance was going to be the pick if Donald Trump thinks that he is winning this election. And that is exactly what happened to pick J.D. Vance, and that is the message that it sends, that Trump believes he's winning. And the reason for that is leading up to this, the donor class, the establishment, whatever you like to call them, sort of the old guard Republicans who fought the hardest against Trump. Now, they've all come over to him, but they put up the most resistance for the longest amount of time. They were not wanting J.D. Vance for a number of reasons. Bulldog, MAGA defender. And what I think whether they want to say it out loud or not, there are some of them, like the Karl Roves and the Rupert Murdochs and the John Bolton, who had much to say about this pick about Vance because Bolton's such a defense hawk and Vance doesn't want any more money going to Ukraine. Maybe, sort of behind the scenes, they were hoping they would pick a more establishment-friendly candidate like a Marco Rubio or a Glenn Youngkin, someone who could say that, the heir apparent is going to be someone who's a little bit more in line with the old guard, the Republican establishment. But, Trump bucked those donors and he said, I'm going with, the most staunch MAGA defender of the group, which they have all become. But he stands out probably the most for that. So it shows a very, very confident Trump doing exactly what he wants to do and putting his party beyond him, Errol.
Okay, and Jason, the idea that this is somebody in the form of J.D. Vance who won one Midwestern state, industrial state, and might be able to help with others, including Wisconsin. That's got to be part of the consideration here too, right?
Errol, of course, and we've talked about this many times over the last few months because essentially the chessboard has not changed in this race to 270. The Biden campaign officially more or less declaring it's Wisconsin, it's Michigan, it's Pennsylvania. It's something that I have mentioned over and over and over again because clearly it seems that blue wall is their path to 270 electoral votes. And we heard earlier today from Republicans across Wisconsin saying that they love seeing a Midwesterner, a Rust Belt candidate join Trump's ticket going forward. How much does that help him kind of close any potential gap in Wisconsin, where he is leading by about 3 points within the margin of error, according to most polls here? But having him on you talk about having Sean O'Brien speaking there tonight from the Teamsters. You have this relatively pro-union candidate in J.D. Vance now joining the ticket as well, supporting unions with private companies that are out there and moving things forward. Wisconsin, a pretty pro-union state. About 8% of our state, and the union membership in our state has ticked up year to year over the past couple of years. When you talk about Michigan, who of course is part of this mix as well, they've got more than 500,000 union members across the state of Michigan. So when it comes to that Rust Belt, potentially pro-union candidate that kind of could help Trump solidify that base across those blue wall states going forward, obviously, according to at least a lot of Republicans here in Wisconsin, J.D. Vance is that guy. And when you're playing that game of chess about where these electoral votes are coming from, not only does this do no harm for Republicans across the rest of the country, this does no harm for Republicans here in Wisconsin, and it potentially pulls in some of those independent voters. Tough to find out there, but they're out there, and they could determine this election in November.
For that, Jason, let's go inside the arena to our Josh Robin. And Josh, Donald Trump said that he changed his convention speech to, quote, bring the country back together, saying instead of the red meat he was thinking of throwing out, he's going to take a different approach. Is J.D. Vance part of that approach, do you think?
Well, I think he definitely has some appeal, as Jason was saying. But if you're talking about, lowering the volume and being more conciliatory to the other side, people are going to point to the fact that not too long after this attempted assassination of the former president, Vance went on X, formerly known as Twitter, and said that it was Biden's rhetoric that led to this assassination attempt. Of course, at this point, the FBI is still investigating what prompted this shooter to do what he did. We don't know what his background was, other than a few biographical points. A red meat guy, but it really is the top of the ticket where he's going to be taking the messages from. And we haven't heard J.D. Vance speak. You just saw him come out and kind of wave to the crowd for a while as he was being nominated. The speech itself, we'll have to see if it follows for what we anticipate in a kind of a limited way, but we anticipate nonetheless that it's going to be more of a conciliatory tone here, a life is short tone, a let's work together unifying tone. I'm a little bit skeptical that that will continue, but I think to some degree we can expect that tone here at the convention, and we'll have, I would imagine that if that continues as we expect, that J.D. Vance will follow along. Certainly the speech is being vetted, and those kind of political figures who you mentioned before, they've said a lot more incendiary things in other occasions. Here, they were a little bit muted. Their speeches were far shorter than what they would probably have.
And Alex, one of the things that's already happened is that the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, has reached out to J.D. Vance to congratulate him. And of course, those two are supposed to meet and debate each other, the vice presidential debate that's been proposed by CBS News. It's unclear whether we're going to see them together. What's your sense of what this face-off might look like?
Oh, I think it will be one to watch for sure, because let's face it, this is in many ways the only new, fresh element that we've seen in this race for quite some time, because Joe Biden and Donald Trump have pretty much dominated it from square one. And so I think, having this brand new VP candidate announced and knowing that he is not one to hold back, and neither is Kamala Harris, it could be very interesting to see these two face off. And I think they also represent two very different sides of America. Kamala Harris, the role in the White House such as this, coming from the West Coast, and then you have J.D. Vance coming from an entirely different region, representing a very different side of America. I think in many ways this could be perhaps more interesting and illuminating than the debates that we've seen so far. And think just about how tremendous of an effect that first debate had on the election. I will note, Errol, I also happened to see that apparently J.D. Vance did not pick up that phone call from the vice president. Apparently he said it was an unknown number to him. I have a feeling his phone was ringing off the hook today. That's why he said he didn't pick up the call.
Okay. So for the Vance team, if you see a number coming from area code 202, you might want to pick that up. Let me go to Tim. And Tim, what's your sense of what this pick represents? I was talking a minute ago with Jason about industrial states, but there's also been a lot of interest in trying to maybe try to flip North Carolina, where you are based. What's your sense of how J.D. Vance fits into that?
Well, and I'm not here to defend J.D. Vance, but just for the record, I don't normally pick up calls of numbers I don't know either. So, but you know, obviously, the Vice President of the United States is a different case. I'm a little bit different on this. I think this is one of the most overrated discussions in politics, so whether the vice presidential candidate will have any impact. People are going to the polls to vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. I just don't think these discussions have an input on what will actually happen in the election. It's much like, we've had the convention in North Carolina twice in the last dozen years or so, and it was a discussion about, will this rev people up, to help them win the election this year? And there's no evidence that holding a convention in a state is going to make a difference. I do think, though, that it is an interesting point about the future of the party's imprint on who might be the next leader of the Republican Party, because I think that's a big discussion, win or lose, over the next 4 years, is sort of who's going to try to be the next Trump in 2028, and does 2032 look more like it used to with the Republican Party? So I think it's more about the future than it is about this election. It's important to talk about because, as we know, both of these candidates are obviously older in age, and so it has a little bit of discussion point, but I just think it's really overrated about the potential impact on votes at the ballot box.
Well, what do you think, though, about the idea, Tim, because this is, of course, one of the other things that gets kicked around a lot, that this is intended to solidify and maybe appeal to a certain wing of the Republican Party, very much like Mike Pence was part of the evangelical movement that Donald Trump wanted and needed in 2016. We've got J.D. Vance as saying, no abortion under any circumstances, including saving the life of the mother or exceptions. That's a pretty hard line, but there are some in the party who want that point of view reflected.
I think that's certainly possible, yes. And we've heard that with delegates in North Carolina, too. But, Donald Trump Jr. on the floor of the convention today, when he was speaking with CNN, said that he doesn't listen to consultants, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, the former president, that he listens to the crowd and the people around. And so I'm not sure that this decision was based on that deep of analysis of what the party might want, that he's doing what he wants. From reporting I've seen, a lot of this has to do with fit and just who the former president was comfortable with at the end of the day, which I kind of think is sort of an interesting choice too, because of J.D. Vance is sort of known as his firebrand, and Donald Trump I don't think likes attention being taken away from him. But it's certainly possible that was a piece of the pie in this decision-making process, because there are Republicans I've talked to in North Carolina platform, and that there was language taken out about the LGBT platform and the abortion platform being watered down of sorts. And so I do think that was taken into that. I just don't think that was sort of some big decision factor in this.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go down to the floor of the convention. Rena Diamante is right there on the floor. Mrs. Diamante, tell us what's going on down there.
Well, the energy down here is electrifying. There are a ton of people on the floor of this arena. I'm standing next to the Texas delegation. They're pretty easy to see, with all their cowboy hats and their red shirts, and a lot of them are wearing the Texas flag. But really, they've been really energized to listen really closely to a lot of the speakers that are speaking right now. Right now, they're listening to Senator Katie Britt. Of course, she is a colleague, presidential candidate. That is Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio. And even though he's not from Texas, I've heard from folks from the Lone Star State and from other states across the country saying that they trust former President Trump's pick for VP. And they say especially that given that J.D. Vance is turning 40 next month, he'll be able to carry that populist message to the future. They regard him as someone who's very intellectual. They say that he's a really good speaker, and so they're looking forward to him in future vice presidential debates in particular. He serves with a number of senators, and we've heard from some of those Republican senators today who say that they've been speaking to how they are afraid of losing a colleague, someone who they believe is a really great colleague in the chamber, but they say that he was a great pick and he's the embodiment of the American dream. I do want to just chat with some folks' values. This is a live interview, but I'm curious to you about what you think of Senator Vance and what you make of him as a vice presidential pick.
Well, look, he's a military veteran, so he knows how to keep America first. He's got a law background, so he understands the importance of the position that he's in and what it matters, how it matters to all Americans. But he's from a younger generation. generation. So I think there are a lot of also young people that see him as an emerging leader. Now he's the vice president pick. I also think it's interesting that at one point he was a critic of President Trump, and now he's one of his biggest supporters, and now he's going to be his, teammate on the ticket. That shows the ability of Donald Trump to turn people around, to get them on his team, and to unite people, and that's how he's going to unite America.
Of course, critics are going to say that perhaps Mr. Vance is not legitimate because he was such a big critic of President Trump in 2016. Are you not concerned about that?
Not at all. I mean, look, let's think about it. Some of them may be here with the Texas delegation that didn't know him, weren't sure if he was sincere. But after he took a bullet for our country and for America, it made Texans and our delegation even more committed to stand with him. If he could take a bullet for us, we're willing to be here and support him 100%.
And my last question, there have been calls from people on both sides of the political aisle, folks from both parties who say we need to lower the political temperature all around. How do we do that, and how do we move forward from that?
Well, look, the message of Make America Great Again should be something that resonates with everyone. That's something that should unite not only Texas, but America. And the fact of the matter is Donald J. Trump is America's president, and the Republican Party is America's party.
Thank you so much. Jonathan Sames, president of Texas Values. He's also a delegate for the loan to a lot of the speakers here. Today's theme is Make America Wealthy Again. And so truly the platform is an embodiment of former President Donald Trump and his values. If you take a look at that platform, it very much reads like a Trump social media post. And so the excitement is here. People are looking forward to hearing from Trump on Thursday and really seeing what else comes from this convention. Back to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Rena. In a big legal victory for Donald Trump, Judge Aileen Canning dismissed the classified documents case against the former president today. The special prosecutor, Jack Smith, will appeal that decision. And Taylor, tell us about the legal reasoning there. Why did the case get dismissed today?
So, in essence, to put it into layman's terms, Judge Cannon essentially said that she did not feel that special counsel Jack Smith, who brought these charges and has been investigating Donald Trump both for the classified documents case and for the separate federal January classified documents case, Smith's appointment was invalid and that he should have never been appointed in the first place. It's worth pointing out that Judge Cannon was nominated to the bench by Donald Trump while he was president, and throughout the time that she's been overseeing this case, she's made a lot of decisions that legal experts, of which I am not one, I will say right there, but of which legal experts have questioned and basically tried to understand what decision she was making, but then when it ultimately led to her dismissing it today, it was, I think, in a 90-page decision that she put out, they were like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense given her skepticism as she was sorting through all of the evidence. And so this is a major victory for Trump. It can be appealed, and we heard from special counsel Smith, he was obviously critical of Judge Cannon's decision, but this could end up back at the Supreme Court. But as we've seen, the Supreme Court, which has a 6-3 conservative majority, has been making a lot of decisions that are more aligned with the Republican Party. Anything else that has happened over the last few days, an assassination attempt, questions about President Biden's age, now J.D. Vance being selected, the fact that one of the 4 major criminal cases facing this presumptive Republican not presidential nominee has now been dismissed entirely is just stunning news and alters the course of this case alters the course of this election, I should say, because there's a good chance that even though he was convicted in New York a couple months ago, Trump may not be dealing with any other legal issues between now and November.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Taylor. And Alex Cohen, it seems like this case may not make it to trial anytime before the election. And then there are implications for what would happen if Donald Trump wins, as a matter of fact, right?
Absolutely, as with so many of his cases. And I think, Errol, it was very interesting to see the post that Donald Trump had on his Truth social media channel this morning. I spoke with him from California. He's also the sergeant at arms at the convention, a gentleman by the name of Sean Steele. And he said, what has been so remarkable about Donald Trump, especially in the hours since the assassination attempt, was his discipline. He didn't call much attention to what had happened. And I think this morning, and getting that ruling from Judge Cannon, the dismissal of the case, we saw what it kind of in some ways unleashed. All of a sudden there was this torrent talking about not just that case, but several other cases that he's facing and referring to them as witch hunts. It's very clear that Donald Trump feels that there is no actual legal basis whatsoever, no merits to any of these cases. And of course, if he's the commander-in-chief, he can change the fate and the trajectory of many of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, so much of the talk has been about dialing down some of the vitriol. On the other hand, you know, you look at some of the says it's time for everyone to unite and throw out all of these cases against me. That's one form of unity, I guess. But what's the likelihood of a different kind of unity emerging?
Well, Errol, that's a big question going forward over the next 4 nights here in Milwaukee, of course, is when we're talking about unity, when Trump is talking about unity, when Republicans are talking about unity, are they going to talk about uniting all of America, or are they going to be talking about uniting up against the Democrats in Washington, of course? That's kind of what we had seen over the last few days, and we'll see how things play out on the stage just behind me here at Fiserv Forum in Milwaukee going forward. What type of unity are we really talking about? And it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to act on it going forward too. So kind of a fascinating development, and we'll see how it plays out through the speeches over the next few nights here. And one quick note, a little bit of developing news here in Milwaukee, massive storm system just to our west, a number of thunderstorm warnings right now. That storm front could be a rough night on the streets here as a lot of these convention goers work to get back to their hotels in a few hours.
Yeah, you know, that seems to happen with these summertime conventions, Jason. I remember Tampa 2012, similar kind of thing. Storms shut things down for part of that convention. And Holly, let me ask you about this. J.D. Vance is younger than the president's oldest son, clearly from a different kind of generation, literally. Is that going to be a plus? Is that going to maybe give a shot in the arm to the party?
Well, we've heard a lot about how we've got 2 old men running for president, so I think a shot of some youth is certainly a good thing. And J.D. Vance has become a very close confidant with Don Jr. That definitely helped in getting this nod from the president. And speaking of the president's son, it was Eric Trump who put his father over the top today for the delegation, so voicing that for Florida. And